If you've read the title of this video, which should be paid in exposure unless I change my mind, you probably have some idea of where this is going. To sort of elaborate on it, because I know not everyone knows these terms. Paid in exposure generally refers to the idea of someone not being paid with money for a service or a job, but rather with a shout out on social media. Often there are some gray areas with this, I guess, where you might try to compensate someone differently. I know that you can sometimes repay people by providing them with a different service, for example. And that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to very specific things, which we will get into. For starters, let me tell a little bit of an anecdotal story. Back in the days when I had Facebook, I would sometimes see messages from old classmates. I come from a relatively small town, so a lot of the businesses do tend to stay with people you know. I know some clothes stores are owned by old classmates. Some people set up their own business, and I came across a message from someone. They had shared an article where someone who had a sandwich shop had used a picture they found on Google to promote themselves and were fined €5,000. It's a pretty big fine, but I fully stand by that was the right thing. This person shouldn't have used this picture, but that's not where the story ends. This article was shared by someone who had their own nail salon and essentially said, well, this is bullshit because you should just be able to use pictures of Google. I didn't engage with this person. I did remove them from Facebook. I eventually ended up deleting my Facebook altogether, so it doesn't really matter. But I kind of wish that I hadn't interacted with them on this, because I have a very firm stance on this. Part of that is because of my own experiences, which is something that I will be talking about. For starters, let me address what this article, and I'm not going to link it, this was like years ago, but if you take a picture of Google, there's a very high chance that it has copyright on it. Now, if you use that in a way where you don't earn money from it, in most cases that's fine, but you might still receive messages like, please don't use this. And if you use it for advertisements, you're definitely making money off it, and that's a bad idea. You shouldn't do that. That's just straight up against the law. While I might not always agree with every copyright law, there are reasons why they exist. And again, I might not always agree with them, but I do try to stick to them. You don't see me using characters that aren't mine, for example, because that would just be theft. And when you work in a creative industry, I think that a lot of people do get a lot more experience with this, because you just find you can't use other people's work. And that's how it should be. Like, if I'm an artist, I shouldn't be able to just repost other people's work and make money off that. That's ridiculous. I don't expect my accountant, for example, to write up a report and then me use that and saying like, yeah, I wrote this, even though obviously I didn't. That's just not how it works. And to sort of address the idea of paid and exposure, I've had interactions with people where I was offered exposure for my work. There was a brief period of time where I would draw realistic portraits of people. This got a lot of attention at one point when I drew an Instagram model who shared my work. I didn't draw that picture of her for money. I did that because I wanted to practice it. And although this is a bit unethical of me looking back on it, and I wouldn't do this again, I made the drawing because I knew she would share it. So in that case, it was done for exposure, but it was all my idea. Nobody asked me to do this but me. I got a lot of followers out of that, and a lot of people asked me to draw them. I was able to make some money off that, and a lot of people asked me how they should contact me. So I set up a business Facebook to link to my Instagram at the time, and within a day I receive a message from someone asking me to draw them, and I say, okay, so here are my prices. And this person essentially said, well, you don't have enough followers to ask for prices. Your Facebook page has 15 likes on it or something like that. That's ridiculous. That's not how this works. For starters, this wasn't even paid in exposure. This was just work for free for me for no reason. The number of likes I get on any given picture, on any given Instagram, or even on a video like this, it doesn't reflect the quality of my work. I know of a lot of great artists who don't get nearly any amount of likes compared to some artists I would consider far worse. And that's more on the algorithm of any social media website than on anything else. So this person suggesting this, and I did respond with, well, the quality of my work is a lot better than the amount of likes, I suppose. And I told them this. They never got back to me, but especially around that time, I would receive so many messages asking me to draw people for free. And I essentially said, well, here are my prices. And a lot of people said, well, can't you draw me for free? One of them even said, like, oh, but I'm friends with the person you drew, that model. Which it got so bad that model actually messaged me saying, hey, these people aren't friends of mine. Don't draw them for free. And I think that says a lot. I'm very happy that she did, even though I wasn't going to just draw someone because they are friends with someone. That's just not how it works. But to really get to that point of being paid in exposure, it is essentially the idea you do something and you get a shout out. I've also been watching a lot of Choosing Beggars subreddit readings. That's a great place to get a very clear idea of what kind of people you're dealing with in such situations as this. It goes beyond just the creative fields, I suppose, which I wasn't really aware of that because I'm not in those fields, but it makes sense that it happens everywhere. But I've had to deal with a lot of people messaging me, and the moment I bring up prices, they just stop messaging, which is actually something I've come to prefer, because some people will also just get really mean. What you'll often see is that someone might send you a message saying, hey, I love your work, I've been a supporter of you for years, can you do this for me for free? And even then, looking at it, they're usually not that supportive of you in my experience. And when you tell them, well, you're still going to have to pay, they essentially say, well, your art sucks anyway. That is a very common thing. There is also another part of this that I want to address. I've worked with other artists in the past. One of them was someone who had a significant following. He had around, I believe, 100k followers at one point when he gave me a shout out because we collaborated on something, and he was a good friend of mine. He was a lot better at marketing than me, and when he gave me that shout out, I ended up getting 1 follower, and it wasn't even clear if that was from that shout out or they just happened to find my page. Which just goes to show being paid in exposure is not a thing, and it doesn't work. The amount of traffic you get from shoutouts is often small. It can be pretty big at times, sure, but you already need to have a very significant following for that to work. If you have less than, I'd argue, even just 1 million followers, it just doesn't work. And I know that I'm not the only one who's experienced this. I've seen like people who were mentioned in like a PewDiePie video who has 100 million followers, and when he mentioned someone or showed someone's Twitter, that person ended up getting 0 following from that. So it's just so unclear. There's no direct ruling in this that essentially dictates you get an X amount of following. So in that sense, it isn't a compensation either. Another problem that I often have with this is if someone pays me in exposure and they tell all their friends how great my work is or whatever, and I'm not saying my work is great, it's purely theoretical. If they do that, all those friends are going to say, that person was paid in exposure, I should be able to pay them in exposure as well. Let's say you tell 70 friends that you got something for free, and you argue, well, it's really great work, you should all try it. Those 70 people will all try to get it for free as well, because that is the precedent that you set with this, which again is not a good precedent. Those people will not pay for your work likely. Even if they do, they'll expect discounts or whatever. There's also plenty of evidence of that, of people just receiving messages like, hey, I was sent here by X, and they often expect free things as well. But even then, let's say those 70 people all come to you, they're likely not going to pay. Even if they do, is that a risk you're willing to take? And I have seen actually messages that handle this really well, because there were essentially, and this is like one company I know that did this. They said, well, if you buy our product for full price, you tell people about it, so you pay us in exposure. After a set amount of people will come to our company and buy things, we will give you half the money back. And I'd argue that's a pretty solid deal. The amount of people that would show weren't even that high. I believe it was 12 or something like that, which again isn't that much, but I'd say that's a pretty great deal actually. And I'd argue that's pretty much the only way you can do this sort of thing. And if you're going to try to get someone to pay you or to do something for you for free and pay them an exposure, this is the way to go about it. Offer them the price, say you'll shout them out or whatever you do, and if they get a set amount of customers, then you can talk about giving money back or maybe working with them in the future for some deal. To end this video, I've often discussed this with other artists as well. Working for free, even if you do whatever it is you do as a hobby, it's not a good precedent to set. When I was just starting out, I was definitely lowballing myself. I would only look at the amount of time that I would put into something, and I would make less than the bare minimum wage. So not enough to live on, but certainly not enough to also justify using the supplies that I did. Especially when I used traditional art. I would buy really expensive paper, I would buy the best materials for inking or coloring or pencils, whatever, and I would not make enough money to even essentially make that back, which is also why I stopped doing portraits. Part of that was the money that I was putting into it was more than I was getting out of it. And another huge part about that was also the amount of people who I had to deal with, which were not pleasant, especially at that time. Like if I go into illustration as a full-time business, I understand that I'm going to come across these people again, but I'll have a much better mindset about it, and it won't be something that I have to do besides school, besides essentially having a full week of work and then also having to do this on the side. And I think that's where I'm going to end this video. I hope the quality of the video is good. Camera says it should be HD, but I'm looking at the screen, I'm kind of doubting it. But yeah, this is the end of the video. Peace.